Welcome back, Suzuki parents. So in this video, I want to talk about the phases that we go through in the pre-twinkle year. So yes, pre-twinkle year, it can take one full year to get through the pre-twinkle level. Some children go faster, some go slower. There's nothing wrong with either of those outcomes. It just is, and we're following the child. And there's a whole list of reasons why a child may learn slower or faster than another. And that's just how it is. So it, on average, takes 1 year to complete the pre-twinkle level. So let's talk about the big picture things that we're trying to establish during this year. Okay, so if we meet these big picture items, we have done very well. So the first is to establish a practice routine. So we need the child to understand that part of mastering something requires practice. So having a regular practice routine is something that we're looking for during the pre-twinkle year. So again, you have 1 full year to establish a routine for practicing. And what we're looking for is a regular practice routine. So something that we're doing every day or every other day, at least 5 days a week for pre-twinklers. And it doesn't have to be long. So you could do 1 minute a day for 5 days in the beginning. Okay, so the idea though is just to get into the habit, make it a routine. And the second thing we are trying to establish during the pre-twinkle year is a listening habit. So children need to be listening to a book ahead, a year ahead. So right now, children are listening to all the pieces in Suzuki Book 1 while we're working in the pre-twinkle stage. It'll take us about a year to complete pre-twinkle, so they will have listened to Book 1 for a full year before we even start working on the pieces in Book 1. Okay, so regular listening is necessary in Suzuki method because children are learning pieces by ear. If you don't know what the song sounds like, we don't have a lot of hope in teaching the song. And it can take quite a bit of time for a song to sink in enough that a child can learn how to play it by ear. So we want to give them as much advantage as we can by listening as early as we can. The next thing that we're trying to establish during the pre-twinkle year are setting boundaries so that a child knows what behavior is acceptable in the lesson or in group class. Okay, so establishing acceptable, correct behavior in lessons. Tone. So the last thing, or second to last thing, tone. So during the pre-twinkle year, we're trying to establish good tone, a good sound to come out of the violin. And then the last thing is, of course, posture, making sure the child is holding the instrument and the bow correctly from the very beginning. Okay, so that's why it's so important for parents to understand how to hold the bow, how to hold the violin correctly, because these are the building blocks, the foundation that is required to play well, to sound good, to play in tune. If we don't have this, it's impossible to learn more advanced techniques, even intermediate techniques, if we cannot hold the instrument or the bow properly. So I cannot stress that enough, okay? So practice habit, listening habit, good tone, good behavior, and good posture. So those are the main things that we're trying to cover. Now I want to go in a little more detail about the phases. So there are 5 phases in the Suzuki pre-twinkle year, and I'm going to put up a picture so you can read along and see visually how this works. Okay, so our phases. The first phase, we're learning how to do the international bow. We're working on focusing, centering, mindfulness, and concentration. We're also working on energy and stop, and we're working on the rest position. Once those are well established, then we move into phase 2, where we're working on the posture, the bow hold, and developing the rhythmic bow arm. When posture and bow hold are sufficiently mastered, then we come down and we can work on holding the violin. Now we have a line here. The first 2 phases are on a box violin or a foam violin. And then we moved into a real violin. So we have very real reasons why most children begin on a box violin or a foam violin instead of the real violin, because we can establish a lot of correct behavior, posture before we give a child the instrument. which actually make sound, which can become a distraction where they just want to play it and they don't really care about the actual technique involved. Also, for very, very young children, we need to establish how we handle and take care of an instrument before we give them a real instrument, to make sure that they are going to care for it properly and respect it within reason. So it is the parent's responsibility. The instrument is the parent's responsibility during the pre-twinkle year. However, we do have to teach a child how to respect the instrument. When they can demonstrate that, then we get a real violin. So then we're in the third phase. When we get our real violin, we're learning how to hold the violin at the same time as learning the basic E string posture. Okay, so everything that is going across this list in a horizontal line are things that are being learned at the same time. Okay, so phase 3, holding violin, and also learning the basic E string posture. But we're not putting the violin and the bow together yet. After the child can hold the violin properly, then we work on placing the fingers on the violin. And after the child understands the basic E string posture, then they learn how to change strings. So they learn how to move from one string to another with the bow. After both hands are sufficiently mastered independently, then we put them together, where we're using both the bow and the fingers together on the violin. Then we have a little phase here in phase 5, where we have the bow and the fingers together, where the child is learning some what we call pre-twinkle songs. And this is just understanding the basic actions of how the finger and the bow work together, the different possibilities and combinations. And then after that, we can move into the twinkles, which kicks off Suzuki Book 1. So basically, we're learning the violin hand and the bow hand separately, and eventually we put them together. We're basically mastering individual techniques, concepts, and then eventually putting them together. And this helps us develop focus, because after all, we can focus on one thing at a time, and then everything else is just noise until you can internalize it. When it's internalized, then you are able to build on top of it and do multiple things at the same time, right? You have to be able to do something so well, internalize it, that you can put it on autopilot to allow you to add in another layer or another concept on top of it. So that's essentially what we're doing here. Okay, so those are the phases of the pre-twinkle stage, the pre-twinkle year. So hopefully that gives you a big picture of what we're going for overall, and help you understand where you will end up and where you are currently on the journey, if that is important to you to understand how well you're doing. All right, I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.